So good evening, everybody. Welcome to this part of our summer solstice and Pilgrims event happening at Adesanya. If you haven't met me, or if you have but you can't remember my name, it's Lokesvara. And I used to live here, but I don't anymore. I live in the east of England. So I only arrived here yesterday and joined in with the, when did you start on Sunday evening? Yeah. So I know there's a whole bunch of different groupings of people here. I'm not actually going to attempt to welcome all those different groupings, just come as you are, and very lovely to see you all, and especially those of you who I do know. This evening, I'm going to talk for a little bit on pilgrimage, probably for half an hour. Then we'll have a little break, and then Vidyamala, who's sitting at the back there, is going to lead us in a ritual, a summer solstice puja, that is dedicated to Green Tara, who is on our throne here, below the Buddha and above Dante. And that will include, the puja will be in here, and then it will also include some offerings at the burial mound. So I think I will just begin. I don't think there's anything else I need to say by way of introduction. So I want to say something about pilgrimage. I've got some, I want to share some of my own inspiration that's behind what that term is and what it's meant for humans and communities and so on. There's an invitation in there to take pilgrimage seriously. Maybe there's a few suggestions. Let's see. Anyway, I've got quite a simple structure, if you like. I'm thinking of pilgrimage as a sacred journey, and I'm thinking of it containing an arc, if you like, that has three elements to it. So there's the journey, the destination, and the return. And so I'm going to say something, not very much, but just a little bit about each of those three elements. And then I'll go back and I'll invite us to consider pilgrimage. We most commonly think of it as an actual journey, like Ratnadharani. Many of you will know that Ratnadharani is walking here from Tooting Broadway tube station over 10 days. And so pilgrimage has this very long and rich heritage in almost every spiritual tradition of actual journeys. But I'm also going to suggest that if we understand or have some sense of the key elements or principles of pilgrimage, we can also then think of it and apply it in other areas, so an interior journey. Sometimes pilgrimage is seen, it's an external journey that will have an inner transformative effect. But my invitation, or one of my invitations tonight, is to think of pilgrimage as an inner journey that doesn't necessarily have an outer or external manifestation. So I will go through this arc of journey, destination, return twice. That's it. And I think to begin, if you don't mind, I'll go straight to destination. In fact, come with me, if you will, to Bodh Gaya. There's in the Pali Canon, there's often these descriptions of like when the Buddha, I think when he first goes from Bodh Gaya to teach the Dharma at the deer park in Isipatana, he reaches the river Ganges, the mighty river Ganges, and the text says, as if someone stretches out their arm like this, the Buddha disappeared from one side of the Ganges and reappeared on the other side. So if I stretch out my arm like this, I invite you to come with me to Bodh Gaya. And I invite you to imagine that we're there at a particular time. And that time is February, let me get the date right, February 1881. And we're there with Alexander Cunningham, who at that time is the director of a fairly recently formed organisation called the Archaeological Survey of India, an organisation that is still there in India today and has responsibility for many of the archaeological sites. Some of our Buddhist friends in India consider it to be a little bit too Hindu-dominated as an organisation. Nevertheless, it has tried to respect the extensive Buddhist ruins that there are and archaeology that there is in India. At this time, it's only 20 years old, the Archaeological Survey of India, and Alexander Cunningham was he was the founding director of it, I think, and he is visiting Bodh Gaya. So it's his second visit, I think, possibly his third, and they are excavating the site, and they discover what they think is the Vajrasana, the actual shrine of the site of where the Buddha gained enlightenment, and they discover some offerings, some coins and some gems that are there. But they also discover that the outer casing of the shrine actually contains another shrine within it. And that shrine, Cunningham recognises. He recognises the shrine. And why does he recognise it? Because it's the shrine that was built by Ashoka about 150 years after the Buddha's parinirvana. And there's an image of that shrine on another Buddhist site that Cunningham has visited and excavated. So he recognises that shrine. And now it might seem very obvious to us now, today, that Bodh Gaya is the place where the Buddha actually gained enlightenment. You can, the actual evidence you can always question, but we're about as certain as we could be. At that time, it wasn't quite as certain as that. I mean, he and others relied on several different accounts. Two Chinese pilgrims in particular, Shuang Shang and Fa Hien, and some other accounts as well, and some of the other Buddhist ruins. But it was far from obvious that was the actual site. And this was one of the moments when he's visiting there in 1881, and he realises, no, I can be pretty categorically certain that this is the Vajrasana. And of course, he had done his reading. In fact, he'd read Xuanzang's book, A Journey to the West, and many other sources. And he knew that Buddhists considered it, the Vajrasana, the centre of the universe. So in a way, for him to rediscover that with some other people, he could see or know or feel the significance of that for Buddhists. So there's several things about that story that have always moved me. Obviously it's an important place, the most important place for pilgrimage for Buddhists. And yet, there it was, lost for several centuries. It had been, a place of pilgrimage for well over 1,000 years. I mean, there are records that people visited that place still when the Buddha was alive. And, and then for the next, even you could say closer to 1,500 years, it was regularly visited by people on pilgrimage. Now, that probably waxed and waned a bit, just to do with the regimes and the political situation and the religious situation in India and the kind of long-term project of Buddhism being sort of slowly or attempted to be assimilated into Hinduism. Nevertheless, it was an important place and remained so for all of those centuries until it was probably already in decline at the time of the Muslim invasion of India in the 1200s. And I remember reading one poignant account of the last dozen monks at Bodh Gaya leaving, and then it disappears, at least from the historical record, and does not reappear until the 19th century. There's some speculation that some of the Burmese monks still knew where Bodh Gaya was, and maybe some of them actually did visit occasionally. It's a little bit unsure. But it's always moved me, the fact that it was lost and then rediscovered. There's just something about that as a story, once lost and then rediscovered. There's also something about the pathos of the ruined temple. There's something so moving to me that the heart of Buddhism, the place where the Buddha gained enlightenment, became this ruined temple. So even though Buddhism was extant and even flourishing in many countries around the world, the heart, if you like, was ruined. And in a way, it's about the unique sense of Buddhism as a world religion, that the Buddha just taught impermanence, and there you go, the place that was venerated just was lying in ruins. And the photos that were taken of that time, the wonders of digitization and internet mean that you can actually download Alexander Cunningham's report that was published in 1892, 170 pages with photos. So you've got photos of the temple as it was when they began their excavation. It's a complete ruin. It's not just a bit of a ruin, it's a complete ruin. The whole site was under a metre of sand and mud. The actual Mahabodhi temple was crumbling on all sides. The roof, part of the roof had fallen in, so that every rainy season in India, the actual temple, the heart, the centre, filled with water, just filled with rain. And then in summer it dried out again. And obviously that cycle was just repeated for probably several centuries. So there's something about the pathos of the ruined temple that has always moved me, and the fact that it is actually what the Buddha taught us. It's what the Buddha taught. All things are impermanent. And yet, it was renewed. Maybe that's true as well. That is things are impermanent, but with human endeavour and so on, and reverence and, effort, things can be renewed. And so they undertook these renovations. There were some Burmese monks helping, I think. And I find that moving, because if you look at the photos of the careful work that those archaeologists did, who were not actually Buddhists, they did have some monks helping them, but to be honest, they thought they did a better job themselves than the monks. They actually renewed it, renovated it so carefully that it pretty much, if you go and visit Bodh Gaya today, it looks like how it looked in 1885 or whatever, when they'd finished their renovations. It looks almost identical today. There was actually a Bodhi tree there when they arrived maybe the first person was, sometime in the 19th century. I did read a record of somebody who visited in about 1811. And there was a tree there on the side, but in very poor health. Who knows if it was not the original, but the one that was planted in the historical record at the time of Ashoka. There was a tree that was planted then. But it died, and Cunningham and the other archaeologists, maybe with support from some of the monks, took a cutting from the original cutting that had been taken by Ashoka's daughter in whatever it was, 300 BCE to Sri Lanka. And that tree is said to be still alive, and they took a cutting from that and brought it back to India. And Cunningham, in his report, he talks a lot about the tree, because when you think of Bodh Gaya, you might think of the Vajrasana, the spot where the Buddha gained enlightenment, the shrine that's there, the large temple that's built around it, the precincts that are there, the stupas, there's a lotus walk. But actually the tree was a site of deep veneration for many of those pilgrims. Like the tree held some magic, if you like, or it held some power. And, and I think this, at least one of the sources I read said, well, this just comes directly from how the Buddha described the tree, the fact that after his enlightenment he spent a week just sitting a bit away from the Bodhi tree, just gazing at it in gratitude because of what had happened underneath it. So the tree itself was held in a high degree of gratitude and reverence by pilgrims. So, why do people go there? Just as an act of pilgrimage, of devotion, of reverence. I mean, when Swansung went there, he was actually, he went to get teachings in a way. I mean, that's why he went. He wanted an accurate record of what the Buddha Dharma was, and he wanted to take that back to China. But when we go there, I mean, I won't spend too long on this, but I've been there 3 times, I think. And I mean, it is an effort. How many of you here have been to Bodh Gaya? Just put your hand up and so on. So a fair number of you actually. It is an effort. If some of you consider going, it is an effort. It's expensive. It's quite an arduous journey. You have to weigh up, will your health be okay? Actually, you do have to consider those things. And they're hard to consider the practical considerations with what you might just consider an act of reverence or devotion or whatever your motivation is. The thing is, and I think it's important to weigh up those questions. I think they are important questions to ask. And so it's worth asking, what is your motivation for going, to make sure that it really is worth it. But the funny thing is for me that when I was actually there, I didn't really need to know why I was there. Like that kind of reasoning thing, that motivation, what is it, what is my purpose being here, actually just, I don't know, it just made sense. Being there made its own sense, even though it had been quite a long and hard journey to get there. And, why is that? I don't know. I think there's something. I mean, the thing is, a lot of the people there, you don't even know who they are. Even the Dharma that they practice, you may not recognise that easily. And yet, you feel a very strong kinship with them. You feel like they're your people somehow. They're there for the same reason that you are there, even if you can't articulate what it is. It's all the more, though, when you do go there with people who you do know. And 2 of the times I've been there have been order conventions. One of them RHR and I organised. And that is also very special, especially being there with quite a substantial number of Indian order members, and actually, having a space under the Bodhi tree to meditate or do puja or do prostrations. That is a particularly special feeling. Anyway, I don't think we really need to know. I didn't feel like once I'm there, I didn't need to know why I was there. So if I can I wanted to start with Bodh Gaya just because that is the heart of Buddhism, and therefore, if you like, that is perhaps a important place to go on pilgrimage to. And indeed, since that renewal in the last 100 years or so, I mean, pre-COVID, I think there was probably 400,000 people a year going to Bodh Gaya. Of all denominations, and I think there's something like 80 different monasteries or ashrams there. So if I can just take one step back and go with my framework, so the journey. So I started with a destination just to evoke it really. Bodh Gaya is the heart of Buddhism and the kind of archetypal place to go on pilgrimage for anyone who considers themselves a disciple of the Buddha. But I just wanted to say something about the journey. If I just remain in Bodh Gaya, there are these accounts, I'm sure all of you or most of you will have heard of them, that there are accounts of Tibetan pilgrims actually prostrating all the way to Bodh Gaya. I know Sankarechta had heard these stories. He may even have seen someone on one of the roads that goes through Kalimpong. So as I understand it, some people would prostrate from Lhasa to Bodh Gaya. Now that's over the Himalayas. I mean, that is quite something. It's hard to find any details or records of that. I suspect the people who have done that are probably they're not on Google searches. They're probably quite poor Tibetan pilgrims. There is one story I came across which kind of made it was syndicated, and that was a Tibetan monk called Sherab Gyaltsen, who prostrated via Kathmandu in 2007. And the report that I read, it made it into the BBC actually, as well as some of the English language newspapers. He was 16 days out of Bodh Gaya, so I assume he made it because he'd been prostrating for 1 year and 8 months. He had a little support crew with him, two a husband and wife, Nepalese husband and wife, who were pushing a handcart with some supplies and making some tea and cooking up some barley. But there he was. So that prostrating means you do a prostration and then you walk to the end of your prostration and then you prostrate again, and you do that over and over again for 8 hours a day, and then you have some food, have some sleep, and then you start again the next day. So it took him 1 year and 8 months. Yeah. Now, him prostrating made me think that actually there is some similarity for me with, we have a prostration practice in Triratna, the Going for Refuge and prostration practice. And I thought, yes, there is some similarity there with the act of pilgrimage. So not necessarily, combining the two as some of those Tibetans did, but just thinking that the Going for Refuge and prostration practice is a purification practice. It's you imagine the refuge tree and you prostrate before it, and then you are blessed, if you like. The white light descends from all of the refuges and purifies yourself and all beings. And pilgrimage is a purification practice, and certainly its medieval origins in Europe. That was probably one of the primary reasons for pilgrimage pre about 1100. I mean, we probably now think of it as punishment, because often people were sent on pilgrimage as penitents. They were sent away. It was a bit like being outcast or banished. But actually, I think the motivation was to absolve people of their sins. So we might call it punishment. I'm not sure if that's the frame of reference that necessarily would have been the dominant one, if you like. I don't exactly know. But anyway, there you go. There was a sort of a shift over a couple of hundred years, I think, where it became more voluntary. Pilgrimage became voluntary, but for 500-600 years, most pilgrims were doing it because they were sent on it, because they'd done something wrong or stupid or were accused of something. So it was a purification practice for them. There's also something about the prostration practice, just because you're using your body when you prostrate, and there you go, when you're a pilgrim, there is something about actually using your body. It's almost like it's so simple. Sometimes, meditation can just be a bit difficult, and even doing some study can be a bit difficult, but actually putting one foot in front of another towards a sacred goal is relatively simple. It can have its own hardships, thunderstorms and everything else, but it's something that you can do almost like whatever your state of mind is. So there is something about using your body which I really like. I follow an organisation in this country called the British Pilgrimage Trust. I think it's only been established 10 years, but they're encouraging people. That there are some, that there's a sort of Christian backdrop, but they actually very strongly advocate and endorse pilgrimage for whatever your faith type, or even if you have no faith. And they describe, they have a nice way of talking about pilgrimage, which I like. I mean, you can look at their website, but what they call it a pathway for practices that elevate the experience of moving through a landscape. It's a really nice way of thinking about elevate the experience of moving through a landscape. And one of the things that they point out, because they note the upsurge in pilgrimage in recent years, maybe in the last 10, 20, 30 years, we probably all know that there's various films and, we read about it and so on, but some of those old pilgrimage routes are, suddenly being used by more and more people again. And one of the things they point out is that although there are some people who are going on what we would define as a religious pilgrimage, there's also people who are just trying to reconnect with the landscape, reconnect with the environment, and re-embody themselves, in a natural world, maybe after feeling a bit disembodied in an urban landscape, perhaps. So, I think that's quite an important motivation for modern pilgrimage. The other thing to say about the journey is that it's, almost always pilgrimages are described and undertaken as a slow journey, aren't they? Best done on foot, or on horseback, or on a camel, bicycle, perhaps. The thing is, you can do it quicker. Sometimes, like Bodh Gaya, it's not that easy to walk there, is it? So you fly there. But even, say, with the Hajj, the Muslim pilgrimage, every Muslim is encouraged to undertake Hajj at least once in their life, and so everybody flies to Saudi Arabia. But then there's actually quite strict protocols for when you walk. You do different walks on different days when you get there. There's an element of walking there. And in fact, we were talking about it this morning about encouraging people coming to Adistana I used to do this, either walk to the train station or walk to Adistana from the train station. It's a really nice thing to do just to complete the journey, even if you have to use mechanised transport, just complete the journey on foot, as it were, slow. And there's something about that rhythm. I think it's a good walking, or that sort of, even if you're not actually literally walking, that kind of pace, there's something about it. I think it's a good pace for reflection. It's a good pace for conversation, actually. It's a good, so if you're with other people. It's also just like how you embody yourself in the landscape. I think it is, the path then becomes a songline, becomes a dreaming track. Actually, you sing the horizon into existence, as it were. There's a really lovely writer called Bob Trubshaw who has done some lovely research imagining the English landscape as an equivalent to the Australian songlines or dreaming tracks, because he says all of the features in the British landscape are named. And if you start to learn what the names are, you can actually make your own songline across the country, as it were. It's a lovely way of thinking of it. And he did that in the county where he was living. And there's also something about just that slowing down as well. Most of us, or we all know this, modern life demands a slightly, or apparently demands a slightly adrenalized state of us. And it means that we're always slightly on alert. And there's a whole area there which I don't have time to go into tonight, but I've come to see the huge significance that our threat alert system plays in producing the fear and the habituated responses to the world that we have. And I think that walking is a very good way of reactivating our parasympathetic nervous system and just becoming a more embodied and integrated person. So, and I think pilgrimage can be a wonderful part of that. There's also something about the paths that we take, the journey that we take. There's a wonderful maps that you can get of some of those medieval pilgrimage routes in Europe, where, like the one that goes to the Shrine of St. James in Santiago de Compostela, in wherever that is, in the north coast of Spain, that you get these start points from all over Europe. Some of them would have been in Britain, and then they slowly merge like the kind of branches of a tree down into this huge trunk, as it were. It's quite amazing. It's an amazing map just to think that that's what. So you're part of this huge thing, and that sort of funnels. And certainly my own walking life, not pilgrimage, but just my own walking life, I always like to seek new horizons and new paths. But actually, I've come to see that pilgrimage, one thing about pilgrimage, it's not just the destination where people may have gathered previously. It's also, people would have walked the path previously, and the path starts to take on the consciousness of the people who walk along it. Don't ask me how that works, but sometimes even just simply keeping that thought in your head when you walk along a path that you know has been walked for hundreds, if not thousands of years, can do something to you. So, perhaps it's slightly whimsical to think that the local gods actually start to learn that people who venerate and who are pilgrims and follow this route and want to support, perhaps that's slightly whimsical, maybe it isn't. But there is something I have started to seek out more and more paths that other people have already used, especially if they've had an intention in their journey. Yeah. Yeah. So, the destination. I'm taking a little bit longer than I thought, so anyway. The destination. Maybe I don't need to say too much about that because I've already evoked Bodh Gaya. But there is something I want to say, which is, there are some places that many of us would have heard of, which are famous pilgrimage sites. And so you may think if you would like to undertake a pilgrimage, you have to go to one of those sites. Like for Buddhists, there's the four main sites, Bodh Gaya and Lumbini and Sarnath and what's the other one? Krishnagar, Paranirvana site. So, and for Christians or others, you've got the Santiago de Compostela. In Britain, you've got the Walsingham Shrine in Norfolk and Canterbury Cathedral. You've got Rome and Jerusalem. For Muslims, you've got Mecca. Apparently, Trondheim was in Norway was a very big Christian, probably the fourth biggest after Rome, the Santiago, and Jerusalem. Who knew that? Trondheim in Norway, Shrine of St. Olaf. But what the record tells us, and again, this is Bob Trubshaw's investigative work, what the records tell us is that almost all pilgrimage was local. There's a few people who go to those, the really big pilgrimages, who go to the really, who will go to those. Lots of people go to them. But what I mean is there's like many, many more people who will go on local pilgrimage. So, for example, in this country, you would go from what might be called a chapel or a daughter church, you would go to a larger church or the cathedral or the episcopal seat, the seat of the bishop, or to a holy well, or just a place, another holy place. And often those pilgrimages would be annual and often undertaken at Whit Sunday, which I think is 7 weeks after Easter, so just would have been a few weeks ago. So not that many of those make it into the written record because they were just so common, and again it would mainly be very poor people who would do them. But pilgrimage is local, so just bear that in mind. A pilgrimage does not have to be to a headline destination. It can be to a sacred grove or a river or, a Buddhist temple. Maybe even we can see going on retreat as a pilgrimage, as we are invoking this week. So, when I started thinking of that, I started to think, yes, I actually do think of myself as a pilgrim, and coming here for me is a pilgrimage. Going to Padmaloka, where a retreat centre we have in Norfolk, where I lived for 12 years, that is a pilgrimage for me. But also some other places. 2 weeks ago I was up in Scotland and I had the great good fortune almost 20 years ago to be introduced to the River Findhorn. Some of you might know this river. There's a Findhorn community, which is a large, long-standing intentional community, which is near the mouth of the River Findhorn, but it's way up in the north of Scotland, and it runs out of the Cairngorm Mountains. And that river has become a special place for me. And so I stopped off there probably 12 days ago and swam in the river. Pretty cold, but bracing and refreshing. And, it's interesting, right, because is it sacred? I don't know. But I do know I've had one experience there where on stones, I went out to the middle of the river. It's an exquisite archetypal river location. It's like being in Canada or something with steep sides and mixed leaf trees, and it runs very fast, and there's boulders and the salmon coming up, and it's really lovely. Anyway, I crouched down in the river with the burbling of the river around me, And for about, I don't know how long, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, I don't know, half an hour, I communed with the river. I knew what it was to be a river. I mean, I know that, again, that sounds fanciful and whimsical and, you know, anthropomorphizing nature and all the rest of it, but I felt like I knew what it was to be a river. And of course, when I go back now, I'd love to recreate that experience, but I can't. Of course I can't. I can never recreate it. So there's always a poignancy of going back. But there's something else as well, which is, because I've been going back there for almost 20 years now, it's a time, and I don't go back that often, you can check who you are, how your life is going when you go back to the same place somewhere. So it's become quite important to me. There's a few places like that. One of them is a 2-hour drive from here. It's the Uffington White Horse, which is on a hillside near Swindon. There are several white horses, okay, but really there's only one, and this is it. Yeah? All the others are something different. The Uffington White Horse, which is a kind of Picasso swoosh, slightly abstract. It's been there for 5,000 years, so in other words, it's been there as long as Stonehenge. But the thing is about those chalk figures, that someone has to go up there every 1, 2, 3, 4 years and what's called scour the chalk. In other words, you have to, otherwise it just grows back and you lose it. Within one generation it's gone. So somehow, even though no one knows what it was for, somehow the local people of Uffington have been keeping that white horse visible for 5,000 years. That is a lot of generations, isn't it? It was almost lost in the 1930s. Isn't that crazy? Yeah, now the National Trust do look after it. But I find that amazing. So I go there, I don't know who those people are, I don't even know what it's for, but you just go there, and you just know that it's been a place of significance for a lot of people, for a lot of generations. Yeah, my father's grave, actually, I'll go there to say that. He died more than 20 years ago. He's buried in a church, in St Mary's Church in Reading Hall in South Norfolk. I'm the only member of my family that goes there now. For years I would go there and plant snowdrops because he died when the snowdrops were out. And again, it's just I go there. With that one, it's not really to check out who I am, it's just to say thanks, Dad, thanks, didn't quite manage to say it when he was alive. Had too many opinions, but actually thanks a lot. I appreciate him these days more and more. So listen, I'm just going to speed up a little bit. The return, and I put this in right because often on a pilgrimage, the return gets missed out. Often in the literature around pilgrimages, there's the journey, you arrive, and pretty much that's the end. You catch the bus home or something. Whereas actually the return is probably the most significant part of pilgrimage. And now, why is that? That's a contention, by the way. That's a hypothesis. I am giving you a hypothesis. I think that the return is the most significant part of a pilgrimage. So, why do I say that? I think what I'm going to do is just evoke Sangharakshita's teaching of the greater mandala of aesthetic appreciation, which is one of my favourite teachings, and I think it's an important teaching for our community and the world. And what he is saying there is that basically what he's trying to encourage us to have, it's the perfection of wisdom literature that's trying to do that, but Bante's commentary on it is that it encourages us to take a non-utilitarian view of ourselves, the people around us and the world. Because he suggests, or the literature suggests, that when you feel you know something, you tend to appropriate it and then diminish it. So live the mystery is one aspect of that teaching, but also relish things. He uses the word relish. Relish things just as they are, just let them be as they are. So it's there's something so beautiful in that teaching. And because if you place it in the context of Sangharakshita's teaching, it doesn't just mean do nothing, because he very much teaches a developmental path that actually we do need to do some active work on ourselves. We need some practices that integrate ourselves. We need to practice ethics and so on. And yet, all of that needs to take place in this larger consciousness, because in the end, that's exactly what it is. It's a state of consciousness. It's a state of consciousness in which there's a sense of ease and uselessness. So all of our activity all of our ethical work, all of our work to help change the world and make it better is fantastic, but it needs to take place within this greater mandala. And I would suggest that that greater mandala is the return journey. It's a simile for the return journey. You've done some work, and then there needs to be a phase, and this is almost like the Buddha, if you like. The goal of Buddhism cannot be attained or created. It just has to be let go. But in order to let go, you have to have created something. So it's a massive paradox, but you just laugh. It's just a paradox that you do need to make an effort, and yet you also need to let go. So the return journey is where you let go, basically. You need to make an effort. There is a destination, but also there's a non-creating, and the return journey can be that. That's the letting go. So the most important part, shall we say. So if you think of the path as the developmental approach to the Dharma life, then the destination and the return journey is the path of surrender. That's what you do when you arrive, you surrender. And that's, hopefully then, there is some kind of transformation that you take back into your life. So, everyone good just for another 5-10 minutes? I've just gone on slightly longer than I thought. I think all I want to do is just to say, that's the, going on an actual pilgrimage, fantastic, a journey, a destination, and a return journey. And then if we think of the key elements of pilgrimage, and I'll do this very, very simply, I would say it's a sacred journey that has an intentional purpose. Yeah, just to give it a really simple definition. So there's an intention there, you set an intention. That's another very lovely thing they say on the British Pilgrimage Trust website. Pause before you start and set an intention. Yeah, it's a really lovely thing to do. So I did that when I came here, even though I was driving. I got in the car and then I just sat in the car for a few minutes and I started to imagine the journey, imagine arriving here at Adhisthana, and I just set an intention and then I started my journey. So if you think of that's what a pilgrimage is, then we're free to sort of play around with it, and then it can become an interior journey as well, an inner journey. It doesn't necessarily have to have that outer manifestation. And then, just to give one very simple example, we can think of ourselves as pilgrims in meditation. If you like, the pilgrim is our awareness. But we can just think of yourself as a pilgrim in meditation. So, and what happens in meditation? We go on a journey, and traditionally the realms of the dhyanas, the higher states of consciousness, are seen as realms. They are actual other realms of existence, if you like, and we can journey to them. So there's a journey there, if you like. In a puja, we go and meet the Buddha or Bodhisattva. So tonight we're going to do a puja to Tara. So we're going on a journey. You can think of yourself as a pilgrim in the puja to go and visit Tara or Tara's Pure Land, or that world as it were. So, and also I think maybe it just draws out the destination, perhaps it's the dhyanic realms, perhaps it's, going to visit, in inverted commas, the Buddha or Bodhisattva. And if you don't feel you can literally experience that in your meditation, well, you can read descriptions of the dhyanic realms, you can read descriptions of the Pure Lands, and then, that you sort of begin to inhabit it just through doing that, through the act of reading those traditional descriptions. But then there's also the return journey in meditation. It's just perhaps an area of meditation that is worthy of a bit more something. That the instruction in meditation would be you make an effort and then you just relax. What Sangha actually call you just sit. In the sadhana practice, the visualization practice that I do, which is the Avalokiteshvara sadhana, the instruction there is there's all these things that you do. You go for refuge, you contemplate shunyata, you chant some verses, you do a visualization, you chant the mantra, and then you let go slackly. That's the instruction, let go slackly. So, and it's like, that is a really, really important element, because it is this realm of non-creating. It's like non-attainment, but attainment. So it's really important. So in meditation, I think it's that element of it, of just sitting, which can be so easy, talking to myself here, so easy just to overlook that, or just to think that you just do a couple of minutes at the end and that's good. In a way, the purpose of the effort and the development is actually in order to let go. It's actually, but you can't grasp after it. It's a bit of a subtle thing, but it's worth evoking amongst us as much as we can, I think. So I've just started to speed up a little bit, which is not really in the spirit of what I'm talking about. It's the oppression of time, isn't it? So I think I will just pause there. What I'd like to do, I think pilgrimage is an amazing thing. Consider doing it. It doesn't have to be to one of those headline destinations. It can be to the park. I mean, I've been thinking of a whole thing of like designing a workshop or retreat that's called How to Enter a Forest. And the forest can just be your bit of woodlands that's all, at the bottom of your whatever. It doesn't have to be very far away, but there's something about going to the places, going to the ancient trees maybe. I'll tell you a very interesting fact that Britain has one of the lowest densities of woodland and forest in Europe, right? They've all been cut down. It's a highly dense population and there's been too much pressure on resources. And yet, it's got 80% of the entire ancient tree population of Europe. Isn't that incredible? Mm. So somehow, although, we've cut down the forest and the woodland, we've somehow, whoever they are, I've got no idea, somehow we've got this whole body of trees that are just like thousands upon thousands upon thousands of like really, really ancient trees in Britain. So, go and seek them out. In fact, in Ipswich, young Richer does do rituals for the Sangha around a very venerable oak tree in Orwell Country Park, which is about 900 years old. So anyway, go and seek out, your holy places, wherever they are for you. And remember that pilgrimage, if you understand the principle of pilgrimage as a sacred journey with an intentional purpose, you can then just start applying it to any area of your life almost, not just meditation. So, just play around with it. And I must say it's really special for me to be here on a week where we actually are using the word pilgrim. In a way, you have to self-declare. We can't call you pilgrims. We can't. You can't call someone else a pilgrim. You have to self-declare if you want to use that term about yourself. Yeah, I'm happy to use it. Yeah, I'm a pilgrim in every sense of the word, and I'm very happy to be one. So anyway, I'll stop there. And we're going to have a pause. And before we do a pause, can I just say just one little word about just before Vidyamal is going to lead a puja for us, because there's an invitation in the puja. We're going to worship, if you like, green Tara, and this being the summer solstice, northern hemisphere summer solstice, with all its associations of it, the gap between the worlds being thin, it being a still point, it being a place where you have access to really deep mystical spiritual realms, but also the forces of the underworld have more access as well. So we need some protection as well as some guidance. So the invitation tonight is that you consider under the protection of Tara, you consider if there's something that you may need some protection from in your life that you would like to ask Tara for some help with, and also ask if there's anything that you want guidance with in your life. You can ask Tara for help. Now, you may not get an answer, but it's worth asking the question, and sometimes you just have to sit and the answer can be not necessarily what you're expecting. But those are the two invitations in the context of our puja tonight. Is there anything that you would like some protection from? And is there anything that you would like some guidance from?